So, thank you for coming on the Wellness Hub. And I would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience, to the listeners.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for having me. My name's Britna Savarese. I also go by Dallas Death Doula. So I am a death doula here in the Dallas area and do public speaking as well.
So, can you tell us a little bit about what is a death doula? What is that? What does that entail? Because I think people know a little bit about a birth doula, right? But a death doula, I understand that it has its name, right? But can you talk a little bit about your amazing work and what is a death doula and what does that entail?
Yeah, so it is much like a birth doula, opposite end of the life spectrum. So it is just a non-medical support person. So I offer emotional support, administrative help. There's a lot of business when it comes to death and dying. So just being there to support families as they kind of go through that journey so that they don't feel alone. They have an advocate. And then helping people with their end of life planning before it even gets to that point, which is, I think one of the most important things that I do because it's such a gift, for the person, but also for their loved ones.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yes. So how did you get into being a death doula? What was, because a lot of times it's a calling. A lot of times people felt it before, and sometimes just even helping people transition. I think there is people don't know much about that space. Um, and it's important just as much as it is important for birth, right? And so how did you get into death doula work?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So, taking a little bit of a journey, when I was 10, I told my parents that I wanted to be a mortician. Every 10-year-old girl, it's princess or mortician. And, I don't know if you can say I'm definitely not like princess material. No, really. I spent a lot of time. My family was from a small town. And so I spent a lot of time in the local funeral home in the town where my parents grew up, and spent a lot of time with Ted the mortician. And I really loved seeing how the community respected him. And, they were constantly telling him, we couldn't have done this without you. Thank you so much for your support. And you called it a calling, and I really loved that. In the industry, we call it the death whisper. And so, like at 10, I was hearing that death whisper, um, but I only knew Ted the mortician. And so that's kind of the name or the role that I latched onto. So, 8 years later, I enrolled in mortuary college, spent about 4 months in there and went, oh shit, this is not what I was thinking. This is a little more kind of predatory in nature,
Right.
not so much the support that, like the whisper went silent, basically.
Oh,
And so I quit school, did a few different things, and then a few years ago, I heard Lua Arthur speak, and she's a death doula. And when I heard her talk about her work, that whisper became a scream. It was so loud, and this like passion ignited in me, and I was like, yes, this was it. And so I was very fortunate to be able to take the Going with Grace program, which is Alua Arthur's training program. Going with Grace is her company. And I've loved it ever since. I've been helping clients since 2 days after I graduated the program. And it is my life's calling. Yeah.
yes. So how do you nurture the whisper? Because we all have, like, how do you nurture that? Because in anything we all do, right?
Mhm.
Wellness, just in our space, because I think a death doula is a part of a wellness team. How do you nurture it? So like this morning, I got back into meditation. I talked to a meditation coach yesterday, and I was like, I need to get back in that space because it's going to continue to put me into a higher level of consciousness, right? And I know I can notice when I'm not nurturing my gift, I can tell when I'm interacting with my clients differently. And so, how do you nurture your whisper? Or when there might be an overload, right? Because in the work that you do, how do you nurture that? Is there any, like a special, do you have a routine or a ritual for yourself to nurture that?
Yeah, what a great question. So I do. I host monthly death cafes, which are you familiar with death
Oh my gosh,
cafes?
they're lovely. It just, I've
Yeah.
gone, so my birth doula, I took my training, was a death doula as well.
Uh,
And she held a death cafe and I attended and I was just like, oh my gosh, we're in the flesh talking about death in this way that there's not a conversation. And it just normalizes it in the flesh in this different way that I have been scared of it my whole life. And then when I'm in this space, I'm like, oh, there, it's just amazing. So go ahead, talk about it. Yay. Okay.
yes, no, that was such a beautiful response because that almost changes my answer. Your reaction is the reaction I get from people in those monthly conversations, and I now host two a month. And that fuels me. That keeps me going.
Okay.
It's seeing people engaged, normalizing those conversations, destigmatizing, crying in a group full of people talking about your fears, or laughing about, something silly that happened, because death can be silly too, and or your plans can be silly. Yeah, so that really fuels me. That keeps it going. Interactions with my clients, those always kind of fill my cup.
Right.
Yeah, and then as far as just taking care of myself when it comes to my own wellness, to make sure that I can be there to support others, I do make sure to take time to meditate, make sure that I have quiet time every morning to drink my coffee.
Right.
Coffee's my ritual. Yeah, and so doing those, I'm able to keep it going, keep it nurtured.
Awesome. And so what has been a story for you, right? Of a client or something that you would want to share, just your experience, because I know through my own healing journey and recognizing what some of my gifts have been, right? I remember one of my guides was like, "Hey, you need to help people transition." And I was just like, I'm not doing that, right?" And it's interesting whenever I'm close to that, an experience like that, I actually come out of the flesh. It's a different experience that I've felt. And so I would want you to share, if you feel comfortable, an experience that you've had navigating being a death doula, helping a family or helping that person transition. What has that been like, or a story that you can think about that has really, I'm not saying all your stories I know are near and dear to your heart, but something
Yeah.
that you would want to share with the audience around you being a death doula and just like your experience, a story.
Yeah, anytime I get this question, I go back to my very first client. I learned so much, as would be expected, but I think it was even more than I was realizing it would be or expecting it to be. She was 97, so elder, very, like perfect health, never in her life been unwell. A couple of scratches, bruises, whatever, but she was doing great. She just was having a lot of anxiety and fear about death. She was losing all of her friends, as you can imagine, at that age. She was just about the only one left, other than her kids and everything. And so she was having crippling panic attacks. And so met with her to talk, to kind of work through that anxiety. And we met three times. excuse me. And I got a call after our third meeting from one of her children saying that she was in the hospital and she was dying. And at first I was like, wait, what? So I rushed to the hospital and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've killed this woman. She was perfectly healthy. And then, and not at all close to dying. Like doctors are
Right.
like, yeah, you're going to live forever in 3 meetings with me. And she's like in the hospital. Oh my gosh. So I'm totally panicked. I walk into the hospital room and she holds out her hand and she said, I have found peace. I'm so ready to go. Thank you, Britna. And home, I just almost lost it. And to this day, I think about that. Not that I did anything in particularly
Right.
special. So, but I gave her
Mm.
a safe space to talk about her
Right.
fears and she was able to work through them and then her body was done. Her body and her mind finally connected and it was beautiful. It was a beautiful lesson to me that we will know when it's time to go and to be able to support somebody in that right then. I just knew this was it.
That's a beautiful story. That's like to see those parts, right? I think we don't, well, I know we don't, right? We don't really get to see the conception of a baby. Like you don't, you got to see things come together in a different way. And there's so much beauty in death. Like there's so much beauty in that, but the way that the world speaks of it, because we don't know necessarily what's on the other side. And so that's such a beautiful story to share. And it has so many layers to it, but it's so simple and there's so much peace in that space. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Um, so my question would be, because I can imagine that uh, I'm just thinking about the audience that may listen to this, right? And where if they know about a death doula. And when I think about that, um, it getting to resonate, because I think sometimes people are like, okay, are my finances in order? Do I have this, right? But if somebody's really this message and these things are resonating with them and they're thinking about a death doula, right? And just piquing their interest or interested in it, right? They're not at the place of transition, or maybe their parents are getting older. My dad just turned 80 on the 22nd of February, right? And we've had this conversation of, well, these things are here, these things are there, but there hasn't been other conversations of transition, right? So somebody may be, depending on where they are, what would it be 3 things that you would offer them if, say, they wanted to book a service with you, or they're looking for a death doula, or this talk has really piqued their interest? What would be 3 things that you would give them to navigate the space? And I know people may contact a death doula in different places of their lives, right? And so if you can speak to that, and we can kind of talk to the different client or different family, but what would be some of those things that you would, somebody who this is resonating with, or even know a death interested in a death doula, what would be something that you would share?
Yeah, so if I understand the question correctly, I'm going to break it down into like 3 times in your life. I think a doula would be really helpful. And then let me know if I need to pivot that or change
Oh
that.
no.
Yeah, so definitely, I think the first time that you would utilize a death doula is probably the least likely people it's the least likely thing someone thinks about when they think of a death doula, and that is when you are perfectly healthy,
Mhm.
um so that you're basically getting your shit together,
Right.
so that should an accident happen, or if you're fortunate enough to live to old age, at least it's one less thing you have to stress about. And that's to do your end of life planning. So I offer end of life planning sessions, just one-on-one sessions where people can come together, either with their families, or just, me, and really work on getting their death binder, as I call it, oh shit binder, whatever you want to call it, get it in place. And that is just one location where you have all your key contacts. It's broken down into different sections, so like personal, finance. You even can start planning your funeral or end of life celebration, whatever that might look like to you. Write your own obituary, everything. I mean, it just includes everything. So that is a wonderful gift to yourself, because as you age, or again, if accidents happen, you know that your wishes, that everything's written down, everything is in one place for your loved ones. It's a wonderful gift for your loved ones, because I think we've probably all experienced those deaths where it's like, great. What did grandma want to be buried
Right.
in? What did she want to even be buried? What is maybe she wanted to be cremated? Like what? I don't even know. And that impedes us from being able to grieve, because we're having to deal with the business of it all. And so, again, first time to contact a death doula is when you don't think you need them. Then the second time would be when you're dealing with a loved one. Maybe it's a parent, an older sibling, anyone like that, a sick child that you need support with in caring for them and getting their end of life taken care of. And then obviously the third time would be when it is your time to die. And so, do you want a death doula to sit with you and your family? Do you just want somebody to be there to help make sure all of the wishes that you laid out previously, are honored? Things like that. Because as you know, family dynamics can get icky at the end of life. And so, to have a death doula there to advocate for your wishes when, Uncle Louie over here doesn't want your wishes, and Aunt Sarah has a whole other idea. So yeah.
Yes. Oh, so no, you answered it perfectly. And
Okay.
so, yeah, no, you answered it perfectly. And one of the things I'm also thinking about, right, because you made a very good point, is kind of family dynamics, right? um, and it is being prepared, right? Being healthy and having something. There is something to be said about that. There is a level of calmness. So for me at an early age, I knew where things were. I'm talking about being a kid. I knew what my parents' wishes were. I knew what that looked like, where it was located, where that stuff was written down. My parents had me at an older age. Like my parents sometimes were the parents of people's grandparents, depending on, and so I think that's fabulous, like what you just said. And so when I think about that, is how to pick a death doula, right? Because this information, death is scary because it's end of this plane, right? Depending on what people are thinking about, right? What they believe in. And so also I wanted to wonder, my question would be is how to pick a death doula. What goes into that, right? I know for me, when I talk about how to pick a therapist, I'm big on consultations. And, I talk to people about when I first got into practice, sometimes there was health insurances that you only got one code for your initial intake, and I didn't charge. I was like, I'm not taking that information because that means that every time you go into the shoe store, you're getting charged trying on different shoes. And I'm not,
Hmm.
right? And so my question would be is how to pick a death doula. What does that look like? What would be something, one or two things that you would tell a person that's looking into that, and in different stages, right? Like you just said, right? Somebody perfectly healthy, somebody for their parent or, older sibling, or even themselves. But what would be those dynamics that one should look for when picking a death doula?
I love this question so much because it is so important, and at all different stages, it
Right.
can be the same person, or you might require somebody else. So I liken it to a marriage. You know, it's very sacred, and you are likely not going to marry like just without dating
Right.
someone. You know, you
Yeah.
just don't want to do that.
Right.
And so I think you should always interview 2 to 3 doulas and see what fits. Ask the questions. Some doulas offer services that others do not. So you
Right.
want to make sure, like if you're at the just at the planning stage, perfectly healthy, is this somebody that also provides visual sitting at end of life, or do they really only care for more of a healthy
Okay.
person? Because there are some doulas that are just kind of like the planners, the end
Okay.
of life planners.
Okay.
And find out, are there, if you have religious beliefs, is it important to you that they have the same beliefs? If not, is it important that they still honor yours? These kind of
Right.
questions. And then, for example, I work with anyone, but I do kind of specialize in the queer community and the polyamorous communities.
Mhm.
Those two have special kind of nuances when it comes to end of life planning. In the queer community, for example, a trans person, making sure that even in death that they're that they're not dead named or misgendered, that any family that might cause strife if incapacitated in ICU, that they're left out of the room, things like that. In the polyamorous communities, every polycule is different.
Mhm.
And so making sure that in death planning, every relationship within that polycule is addressed and respected, so that in death, all of those relationships are also honored and advocated for by a death doula. So if you're in one of those communities, you want to make sure that your doula is respectful and knowledgeable. And if not knowledgeable, is at least willing to learn
Right.
about those if they are the one that you choose to support you.
That's amazing. I didn't even think about that, in the communities, that you serve. I'm not saying you don't serve other, but I didn't even just
Hmm.
think about being misgendered or, being in the poly relationship, like just honoring, or a family member who may not honor your choices, like putting them, making sure, they don't disrupt the flow or disrupt your wishes or, I didn't even think about that. And that's pretty powerful
Yeah.
for someone to
Yeah.
have that. And
And
yeah,
being here in Texas, there's a lot of fear around that, like in the queer community. Will the medical community honor my partner and I's adopted child? Will they consider us both parents? Will there, all these kind of
right.
things that, especially now, seem really to be calling to people to kind of get their shit together, get
Yeah,
everything taken care of.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That is pretty dynamic. I'm enjoying this. I'm gonna definitely have to have you back. So my question would be, what would be one thing, because you've been giving us so many nuggets and so many gems, what would be one gem that you would want somebody to walk away with after they listen to this? They've listened to everything, which has been amazing. Is there one thing that you would want to tell the audience, that you would want them to put it in their back pocket or in the bra or somewhere on them for them to carry with them and be like, oh, I got that from this interview, from you?
Yeah. Talking about it is not going to make it happen. I hear so many people, they're fearful of talking about it. And I talk death all day long and I'm still here. And that may sound like such a silly nugget with everything else that we've talked about, but I think it's the nugget that grows.
Right.
Because if you destigmatize talking about it, those conversations grow. If you're not scared to talk about it, or if you're not scared to listen to it on a podcast, you're not scared to tell your friend what you
Right.
heard on the podcast. You're not then, these conversations
Yeah.
grow. And so I think that would just be it. Don't be afraid to talk about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing. And so
Yeah.
where can people find you? Where are you on the internet? Where can people find you? What's your website?
Yeah, so I made it real easy if you Google friendly and all internet search friendly. I'm just dallasdeathdoula.com, on Instagram, Dallas Death Doula. And I'm gonna start TikToking soon. I know old people in technology, I'm getting
Yo.
there.
Yeah.
And that is just Dallas Death Doula.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you for coming on. I would love to have you on again to even just kind of walking through, like you touched upon topics that I'm not even aware of, right? That I learned something today. And I think that that information's very important, that I think it plants the seed and then watering it for it to grow, right? I really love your gem of saying, hey, like talk about it, right? Because then as you talk about it, you just don't know what somebody else knows. So you just shared a lot with me that there's some things that I knew, but then there were some things that I didn't know that now when I encounter a client or somebody that I'm working with, a friend, I can say, hey, this is what you can think about. I can refer them to you because there's these nuances, there's these things. And I think knowledge is power. And I think where we're at, we are bombarded with so much information. Um, but sometimes, and a lot of times, it's when I tell you something or when you tell me something, it sticks differently because there's a connection, or there's a connection to a friend or a family, because you know a personal story or you know them. And so I know I would love to have you back on, and I appreciate you coming on. And thank you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your interest in this. I think it's so important to get these conversations going. So, yeah, pull a Barbie on the dance floor. Ask people if they've thought about dying. I say go
Yes.
for it.
Yes. So are your death doulas in person? I mean, your death cafes in person, or are they virtual, or both?
My death cafes are in person, but there are people that do virtual death cafes, and you can find out that information at deathcafe.org. I believe
Yes.
it. Maybe deathcafe.com.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll find it out.
Edit that. Yeah. I'll
Yes.
say three different ones. Deathcafe.com, deathcafe.org. It's deathcafe.net. Now your editor can do the magic, whatever we figure out it is. Just right
I love it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
in. Thank you so much.